Hey guys, and welcome back. Sorry, the goose is going to honk the entire time because she doesn't understand why I'm in the field today. I actually had a completely different herb planned for today, but this morning I walked outside, looked over into the field next to my house, and saw the chicory is in bloom. And I thought, well, I guess today's lesson has already chosen itself since we're starting down the digestive herbs, right? So that is the good thing about herbalism. Sometimes it'll drive you instead of you driving it. So today we're going to spend a little time getting to know our friend chicory. Not exactly just what herbalists have traditionally appreciated it for, but the plant itself as well, since I actually have it growing wild out here. Because I truly believe before we ask, what does this herb do? We should first ask, like, who is the plant? So let's actually meet chicory and sweat and detox the entire time we're doing it. So this is the bees are everywhere. So before I say anything, let's just take a moment and actually look at the plant, right? I mean, it's a beautiful plant. And I think one of the biggest tragedies is that so many people drive past this every single day and never notice it, right? I know I did for years before I really got into the different plants. Like, I knew all the hot topic plants in herbalism, but I didn't know the everyday plants. But the moment those bright blue flowers started blooming, like, you can't miss them. And herbalism, when you really start to study it, will change the landscape around you. Even as you drive down the road, you will notice the different herbs in the ditch line and stuff like that. You just can't help but, right? Because they just stand out so much once you've studied them. So these flowers, I mean, look at that color. Depending on the light, they could be an electric blue. Sometimes they lean more towards a lavender color. And pictures never really quite capture how beautiful these flowers really are. I mean, I'm looking across the pasture now, and there's even some that look white in the light, right? So what looks like one flower really isn't. Just like other members of the daisy family, this flower head is actually made up of a lot of tiny individual flowers packed together. See, nature loves efficiency. So instead of making one giant flower, it creates dozens of little ones working together. And I think that's pretty amazing, actually. So another thing, if you come back later this afternoon, many of these flowers will already be closed. And they usually open during the morning hours and begin closing as the day gets hotter. Plants have a rhythm of their own too, and the more time you spend observing them, the more you begin to notice those rhythms of the plant. So you might actually even find it's hard to identify them once they close too. Now, the stem of the plant, look at the stem. See how upright it is? And you'll notice how the flowers come directly, they're not clustered at the top. They're coming directly off the stem, right? So some are open. These down here are still closed. They haven't opened yet. Others have already finished blooming and they're dying. So like this one's open, this one's dead, and this one will be the next one on the plant. It's almost like the plant is blooming in slow motion, right? Its own rhythm, its own season, which is kind of nice. If you break the stem, there's a milkiness that comes out of it too, right? That's a good way to identify this plant as well. Now, if you look at the lower leaves of the plant, they might remind you of mullein, right? So the way they bosel at the bottom is almost like a mullein plant, but the leaves themselves almost look like a dandelion leaf, right? They're deeply lobed, long, and they almost hug the ground, right? And then as you travel higher up the stem, you'll see how different those leaves actually are, right? They become much smaller in comparison, and they begin wrapping themselves around the stem, right? And that's one of the reasons I always encourage you to go sit in the field. Hopefully the cows stay way over there. But actually study the different leaves, because if you don't do that, you're going to miss half the story, right, of the plant. So getting back to the stem and this bee that's coming to hang out with me, woo! There's a white sap. I don't know if you can see it or not, right? You'll find that white sap in a lot of the members of the daisy family, right? So again, that helps you figure out what family it's in. But please don't only use this characteristic as a way to identify the plant. That's never going to be enough, and you could actually do real harm to yourself. But when you combine the blue flowers, the stem, the leaves, and the milky sap, right, now you're starting to build confidence in your identification of the plant. And confidence, right, comes from observing lots of different characteristics, not memorizing one. So apparently me and the chicory are not liking each other throat-wise today. So where does chicory choose to live? Well, so if you'll notice, I don't have any growing in my yard randomly, right? It's actually over in the cow pasture area where the ground has been disturbed, right? It's not, I mean, you probably could grow it in a flower bed, but most of the time I see it growing wild. It's not in rich garden soil. It's out here thriving in the disturbed areas in the field. You'll often see it on the roadside, fence roads, walking trails. Usually mulleins not too far away from it either. But it loves disturbed ground, and that tells you about the personality of the plant, right? It's another one of those resilient plants. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It simply grows where it has the opportunity. And honestly, I think that's kind of the reasons why I actually love wild plants so much. I love wildflowers. They tell you so much. They're incredibly resourceful, and they use the environment and flourish where they grow. You know, they're not high maintenance, which I like. So, as you noticed, there was a bee here a few minutes ago. So those bees actually love this plant. It's a pollinator as well. You know, butterflies actually enjoy this plant too, right? Let's hope snakes don't. So one of the biggest lessons herbalism has taught me is to slow down. This plant is not living in isolation. It's feeding the pollinator, it's supporting insects, it's providing a habitat for something, I'm quite sure. It's part of its own little community, and it's doing its own little thing, right? And I think that's kind of cool when you stop and look at things holistically on that big scale, right? So, I don't know. I might have ran the bee off swatting him. But there's some clover down in here too. Quite interesting. Now, this is where we're going to tie it in to our digestive system, right? So as beautiful as these flowers are, they're not the part herbalists have traditionally been most interested in. The real story is actually underground, right? So you're going to have to go all the way in to the root, right? So right beneath my feet, or well, my legs, there's a very long taproot that's associated with this plant, and that's where herbalists have traditionally focused much of their attention, right? Digestive herbs, remember, are not interchangeable. So chicory is the perfect example of that, right? So we're going to talk about some different herbs, but like if I held up ginger and then held up chicory, well, they're both digestive herbs, but that's just about where the similarities between the two plants would end, right? Ginger is warming, and you consume the rhizome, right? Chicory is bitter, and you usually use the root, right? Peppermint is aromatic, and you use the leaf. Chamomile, you use the flower, right? Different plants, different parts, different chemistry, different personalities for sure. But that's why herbalists don't just ask, what's the best digestive herb, right? They ask, what does this plant contribute, right? And that, again, is a much better question. Everybody wants the easy answers, but sometimes the easy answers just aren't available, right? Because every one of us is different. Bitterness serves a purpose, right? So if you've ever tasted chicory root, you know it's bitter. And if you've already watched my video on bitters, right, I'm not going to go into reteaching that today. So if you want to know more about bitters, go back and check out that video. But I want you to notice something. Nature didn't accidentally make this root bitter, right? That bitterness reflects the plant's chemistry. It's one of the reasons herbalists have traditionally appreciated chicory as part of a digestive herb. It reminds us that taste can be one of our first introductions to a plant, right? Whether that plant is sweet or spicy, cooling, like peppermint. I can always tell when there's peppermint in a tea because it always has this cooling effect. The plant could be aromatic, bitter. Those flavors are clues, right, to what this plant might be doing for us. So one of the reasons I wanted to introduce chicory early in this series is because it's one of those wonderful plants that blurs the line between food and herbalism, right? Young leaves have traditionally been eaten. The root has been roasted and used for coffee substitute for generations. The root also contains inulin, a naturally occurring prebiotic fiber that helps nourish beneficial bacteria in your digestive tract. And I kind of love that, right? Sometimes herbalism isn't about reaching for a tincture, right? It's about understanding the plants we've been eating all along and how they help support our body. So, if you want to have a little homework, don't buy anything, but don't harvest anything. Just go outside. See if you have chicory growing around you, right? Spend 5 minutes with it. Watch the flowers. Observe them in the morning as opposed to the afternoon. Notice where it's growing in your area. Watch the insects that hover around it and ask yourself, why is this plant happy right here where everything else probably, if I had put a rose bush here, it probably wouldn't have survived, right? So why is chicory doing so well? And this helps you actually take in and become more of an herbalist, because herbalists are observers of this, right? So I hope the next time you drive past one of these beautiful blue flowers, you don't just see another roadside weed. I hope you see a resilient member of the daisy family, a traditional food, a nice coffee substitute, and one of the classic original bitter herbs. And a plant that reminds us that every digestive herb has its own unique story in what it's doing. So next time, we'll continue in our digestive series with ginger, and that was the one I was going to do today. So if you saw my digestive intro, I was going to do ginger. But when I saw this growing here today, and the flowers were popped out, and I had the availability to come out here early in the morning and do this, because for me it's early Sunday morning. As you can tell, the sun is still in the east over here. I wanted to take the time when I can to show you these things growing out in the wild, because I think that's when you really start to understand these plants more. So until next time, stay rooted, stay curious, and as always, keep growing in grace.